Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for March 31st, 2021. I'm going to talk about two things today, Syria and the Green New Deal. Let me start with the absolute atrocity of Anton Blinken's appearance yesterday before the United Nations, in which he defended U.S. sanctions against the Syrian people, which have left close to 90% of the population in need of food, leading to long bread lines, gasoline lines, children dying of starvation. And what he said is that Syrians are dying because of the Assad regime. Now, this is the sanctions that were initially imposed by Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State in the Trump administration. Blinken is not only defending them, but saying they are necessary. Blinken is a longtime supporter of regime change in Syria, and he's blaming Assad. Now, this is like blaming Assad for the numbers of Syrians who died in the civil war and for the refugees that fled Syria and included those who came to Europe, provoking a real crisis 2 years ago. It should be noted that before the Obama administration started backing the so-called moderate rebels with arms, logistical support, and training, there were no Syrian refugees. The population of Syria may have had some gripes with the government, but it was only when arms were brought in and the U.S. gave full support to the so-called moderate rebels who were a transmission point for weapons going to the Syrian terrorists to kill the people of Syria. Now, this was exposed by Michael Flynn when he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, who pointed out that U.S. weapons were going into Syria, including some from Libya, going through Turkey into Syria. But that wasn't stopped. Now, Blinken himself said that Obama did not go far enough in launching bombing strikes against the Syrian regime. Now, this is the kinds of atrocity or series of atrocities rather, that were exposed by Julian Assange for U.S. military efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the people responsible for this are not necessarily the troops on the ground, but those who organize the wars, support the wars, and arm the troops to carry out the atrocities, namely the officials in the Obama administration and the military-industrial complex under both Obama and President Trump. Colonel Richard Black, who is someone who has been in Syria, who's very familiar with military law, he served as the chief of the criminal law division in the Pentagon, spoke at the Schiller Institute conference just held on March 20th. And he told the conference, or the 21st rather, he told the conference, sanctions do nothing but attack the innocent, the poor, the helpless. They are the most cruel and barbaric type of warfare we can wage. Now remember, Donald Trump wanted to end these wars. He made some efforts to do that. He worked with the Russians to try to defeat the terrorists, and the terrorists were mostly defeated in Syria. So why are we tightening sanctions now? Because the goal was not to fight terrorism. That was not Obama's goal. That's not the goal of the military-industrial complex. It's to carry out regime change in Syria, as they did in Iraq, and to destabilize the whole region as the front end of a British geopolitical strategy to prevent there from being economic development in this region, which is a crucial part of the bridge, so-called, between Eurasia and Africa and Eurasia and Europe. So I would urge people to watch the presentation from Senator Richard Black and also from Dr. Shabana, who is the advisor on media and politics to the Syrian presidency. Both of them addressed the Schiller Institute conference, Dr. Shabana on the 20th and Richard Black on the 21st. And you can see that at theschillerinstitute.com. Now, also at that conference, there was compelling presentations exposing the fraud of man-made climate change, which is being used to push the Green New Deal, which is the centerpiece of Biden's next phase of the so-called Recovery Act. Biden is talking about a $3 trillion investment in so-called infrastructure, the vast majority of which will be going to inefficient development of inefficient energy production from windmills, solar, and so on, the so-called sustainable energy, which doesn't work unless it has massive government subsidies. Now, in those presentations, we had the distinguished physicist, Dr. William Happer from Princeton University, who for a period of time was appointed by President Trump to the National Security Council to bring his expertise on climate and environment to that body. Unfortunately, his work was never fully realized because of the institutional impediments, including in the State Department and the intelligence community, to the attempt to expose the Green New Deal. Now, what Happer talked about is how the CO2 issue is a hoax, a fraud. There's no science to it. In fact, he said it's like a religious ideology. And he said that's why it's so hard to convince people that they're wrong when they say we have to do something about CO2. It's worth noting that there are places that have no internal combustion engines, like Mars, which also are experiencing warming. Why is that? Because the actual source of warming is from solar radiation and developments going on in the broader universe, not the fact that we have factories and automobiles on Earth. But what the Green New Deal will do is make it so that you can't drive anywhere, you can't fly anywhere, you can't eat meat, you can't cool your house in the summer or warm it in the winter. This is a fraudulent policy that's being rammed through by using people like AOC and Greta Thunberg. But also, this is Pelosi's policy, this is the policy of Schumer. There are Republicans who are soft on this, and Biden is going to have on Earth Day a summit to push this further. Now, the other presentation at the Schiller conference was by the Executive Intelligence Review's Richard Freeman on what the Green New Deal would do to destroy the physical economy of the United States and the world. He went through in some great detail which industries are being targeted by this, including aluminum, steel, and concrete. Now, how do you have an infrastructure plan that doesn't allow the use of steel, aluminum, or concrete, which are necessary components of any kind of lasting infrastructure? So the two presentations are a devastating critique of the idiocy of the so-called Green New Deal. And again, they're available on the schillerinstitute.com website. And also you can see the Happer-Freeman presentation at the LaRouche Organization website. Now, while this exposure was being done by us, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin defined climate change as the #1 priority of the U.S. military. Now, for those of you who have this lingering hope that the U.S. military is operating on behalf of Donald Trump and will put him back in the presidency, what does it mean when Trump was a leading opponent of the Green New Deal, a leading opponent of the Paris Climate Conference, and yet the military now is saying that's the #1 target for them to address? What might be asked of Austin, remember, Austin is from a military-industrial complex background. He was on the board of Raytheon after he left the Army. What about the military spending, which is going up on military equipment for wars? Is that not harmful to the environment? What's the carbon footprint of the production of bombers and tanks and missiles and so on? And if you look at the results of the wars in Southwest Asia, I think it's very obvious that war is harmful to the environment and to the human existence. So these are two issues that have to be addressed by the American people. Will our government continue to carry out barbaric tactics of sanctions against people whose only crime was they fought against the Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists who have repeatedly targeted American forces in the region? Why haven't those forces been removed? Why not work together with China, Russia, and other countries to rebuild these war-torn areas? And at the same time, deploy the funds necessary through a national credit system to rebuild the infrastructure in the United States, which in some parts of the country looks as though it's been the victim of bombings and war. So, to get a better picture of this, the Executive Intelligence Review has now a mass pamphlet coming out. Actually, it's the LaRouche Organization which has a mass pamphlet coming out on the Great Reset and the Green New Deal called The Great Leap Backward. And you can use the link in the description below to order a copy for yourself and for others, because we have to de-brainwash the population that's been bombarded with this fraudulent science and this lie that man is the cause of climate problems. And at the same time you're doing that, go to the LaRouche Organization website, go to the Schiller Organization website, Schiller Institute, and watch these two videos, the Richard Black presentation on Syria and the Happer-Freeman presentation on the Green New Deal, and circulate those to your friends. Join with us, because the Green New Deal and the Great Reset are coming like a locomotive at the world, but they can be derailed because they're hostile to human civilization, hostile to sovereign nation states, and a threat to continued existence of the human race. So join the Schiller Institute and work with us to defeat this. Thanks for listening today, and I'll be back again tomorrow.